The first full day of the golden age of America after Donald Trump's inauguration yesterday and the Ohio State University Buckeyes' magnificent win last night against a very talented Fighting Irish team. More on that later. Three big stories I want to cover in my opening monologue. Number one, Elon Musk did not give a Nazi salute. Anyone who suggests or implies otherwise is either ignorant or willfully engaging in the defamation of Mr. Musk. Only someone suffering from TDS could look at that entire video and conclude that Elon Musk gave a Nazi salute. If you have someone in your timeline who says that he did, block them or do as I do, mute them, because they are not reliable sources of news, facts, information. Number two, birthright citizenship. I believe this has been asked and answered, and that the president's executive order will be the occasion for the Supreme Court to expand and clarify the 1898 decision of Wong Kim Ark. In 1898, Wong Kim Ark left the country. He had been born of non-citizen but legal resident parents and left the United States and was barred from reentering under the mistaken belief that he was not naturalized, was not a citizen pursuant to the 14th Amendment. He was. The Supreme Court decided that in 1898. Now, what they have never had before them is a case of the child of two parents in the country illegally. That is, they entered without permission. Wong Kim Ark's parents had permission. They were legally domiciled in the United States. That having been said, I believe the Supreme Court will quickly dispatch this because of the reliance on birthright citizenship, which is systemically imbued in our system and has long been the rule of law in the United States. It is not without a discussion. There will be some interesting opinions. There might be some dissents, but I believe the Supreme Court will uphold birthright citizenship, and I believe that the president's executive order on this precipitates that. To the January 6th pardons. First, some facts. I'm going to rely on NBC News for these facts because I haven't read the EO in which the president issues his 14 commutations and his 1,500 pardons. I don't know the specifics. I do know the defense counsel for 55 of the J6 defendants, and I have long been concerned that some of the 1,500 were very badly abused by the Department of Justice, and some of them deserve very long prison sentences, those convicted of seditious conspiracy. I want to use the numbers, though, provided by NBC. NBC tells us this was the largest FBI investigation ever, with more than 1,500 people charged, more than 1,000 defendants after the charging. I know what happened to the 500. Quote, many low-level riot defendants were sentenced to probationary periods having been convicted of misdemeanor offenses like parading inside the Capitol, close quote. About 700 defendants who either never received prison sentences or who have already completed their sentences, meaning pardons or commutations would have very little impact on their lives, beyond restoring voting rights, gun rights of those who were convicted of felonies. More than 600 people were sentenced to incarceration of the 1,500, but only a small fraction are still behind bars. And so there's a thunderstorm of facts here, and I don't know how to categorize the 1,500. I have long told members of Congress that everyone who rioted needed to be prosecuted because it was a very dark day in American history. I have also long said there is always going to be prosecutorial misconduct when you try and overcharge. I listened to the commentary podcast this morning, and Eli Lake of the Free Press said on the commentary podcast, hundreds of people were overcharged. I already knew that. The Supreme Court already held that. The Supreme Court already held that some of the statutes that were brought in, some of the J6 defendants were in fact illegitimately charged. I also know that the fruit of the poison tree is deep within our due process system. That is, that evidence which is obtained by unconstitutional searches and seizures or other intimidation tactics may not be put into evidence. I don't think, and I've said many times, the J6 committee was a fraud. It was a fraud because Nancy Pelosi rejected Jim Banks, now senator from Indiana, as the duly appointed chair that Kevin McCarthy selected, and she appointed two of the minority's members, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. That was a breach of House rules, and I believe everything that flowed out of that committee is illegitimate. If it was used in any of these proceedings, it ought not to have been allowed as illegitimately obtained evidence. I don't know, nor am I interested in getting into the 1,500. I think I'm not an advisor to President Trump. I'm not. I would have advised him, do not commute the sentences of those who are convicted of seditious conspiracy. There are some very bad people in that group. However, I understand the decision by the president to move forward quickly to other issues and to declare early on, we're not looking backwards, we're looking forwards. Many of these people have been held under very, very onerous conditions. Many people are wrongfully charged, and I have talked at length with the defense counsel that I know, and you can follow him over at Shipwreck Crew on X. Long time, 22 years as an AUSA. He's a prosecutor, married to law enforcement. He knows his stuff. If I ever get in trouble, I'm calling up him, or I'll call Judge Larson. I am not comfortable with letting the very, very bad people out of jail, but the president swept and he got it off his desk. It would have been preferable, in my view, to have assigned that task to a very serious lawyer to go through very quickly, with 30 days. Come back to me with those who deserve pardons, those who deserve commutations, those who deserve clemency of some sort, and I'll sign the order. He didn't. He got it out of the way, and I think he may have been motivated, at least in part, by the sweeping number of pardons and commutations, some of them preemptive, issued by former President Biden yesterday and the day before, including Leonard Peltier, who ought never to be out of jail. He executed 2 FBI agents, all right? Never should have been allowed. I don't know who in the world suggested this. There isn't a chance on this planet that Joe Biden knows what he was doing yesterday. Here's my bottom line. Due process requires that one set of law and regulation apply to everyone. You don't find the person and then seek out a crime. You find the crime and seek out the persons. Not everyone who entered the Capitol had a guilty conscience, mens rea. Not everyone who entered can be justly accused of rioting. They wandered in and they wandered out. But some who came into the Capitol did so with the intent to murder or maim. And I think that is a grave error to allow those people out of prison. Nevertheless, I understand what the president did. He is sweeping stuff off the desk because we are in a war with the Chinese Communist Party. It's a Cold War, not a hot war. We're in a war with Iran. We're in a war with Russia. We are in a war with North Korea. It's a Cold War, not a hot war, though it is a hot war for Ukraine. We have to focus and execute. And I have had it, absolutely had it, with the legacy media's corrupt reporting of everything to do with Donald Trump. And they're putting this to the top of page 1 after Joe Biden pardoned 5 members of his own family and a murderer of FBI agents. No, I'm sorry, a clemency for the murderer of the FBI agents, commuting the sentence. And get over it. It's done. Let's move forward. Let's focus on the future. Let's focus on prosperity and freedom and protecting our cities. I come in a little bit hot today because I happen to have seen another example at Columbia University of anti-Semitic behavior. The invasion of a classroom where they're teaching the history of modern Israel by masked protesters who disrupted the students and would not leave, right? Prevented the teaching, the mission of the university. If I were Donald Trump, I would ask my acting Attorney General McHenry to immediately dispatch lawyers from the Division of Civil Rights and FBI agents to Columbia to track down and find those people who are doing that because it violates our civil rights laws, to intimidate on the basis of race. And that's what the anti-Semites are doing. I would also direct the acting Secretary of Education, whose name I do not know, to dispatch investigators from the Office of Civil Rights to Columbia to begin a new investigation, de novo, into the systemic anti-Semitism at that campus and prepare to cut off all funding to Columbia. All, not one federal dollar as a sanction. They can fix this. They choose not to. We've had an abundance of evidence. So I throw all this at you in the first 10 minutes to let you know it's going to be a fast and furious 4 years. And I'm looking forward. I'm not looking backwards. I will bring you news as it happens, including a stabbing attack in Tel Aviv this afternoon, which is truly horrific. But of the 4 people stabbed, only one is in serious condition. The terrorist is dead. The terrorist was an American green card holder. So I want you to understand there are people in this country who are very, very bad actors, and we have to get them out. We have to deport them, and we cannot give them green cards. And we have to get serious about the rule of law and the prevention of additional abuses. But rioting at the Capitol is not something that should be condoned. Republicans should not be afraid to say that, But at the same time, I understand what Donald Trump did yesterday, which is to cut the rope and move forward. It's an old story now. It's over. And now we look forward. Noah Rothman is the senior political writer at National Review. He joins me. Welcome to the first day of the Golden Age, first full day of the Golden Age, Noah Rothman. I've already covered Elon Musk, birthright citizenship, and the pardons of the J6 defendants. Anything to opine on those three subjects?
Well, I think that the January 6 pardons are a disgrace. I think that the notion here that this is going to, the 14th Amendment revisions are somehow going to glide through the courts is somewhat unfounded, and the risks of political backlash there. But those are really the only downsides to the last 24 hours, with the exception, and I will put in a good word as far as downsides go, for Donald Trump's post-inaugural address statements to Congress, in which he totally indulged the Donald Trump that we all know and love. The election 2020 was rigged. Liz Cheney doesn't like a policy that doesn't get us to war with everybody. Adam Kinzinger cries all the time, and Nancy Pelosi did January 6th. All that stuff was kind of messy. But beyond that, the executive orders are very good. The repeal of Joe Biden's executive orders are very good. And the statements that were made during Donald Trump's workmanlike inaugural address, I think will serve him very well. There was very little high-flown rhetoric in it, a lot of to-do list items that he wants to see it done. You know, you can quibble over the value of picking a fight with the government of Panama, but beyond that, just about everything was an agenda item that I think the American people writ large, a majority of Americans, would support. So on balance, a good day for Donald Trump with some really pregnant storm clouds on the horizon.
Are we better off today than we were 48 hours ago?
You know what? It's still early, but I would say yes.
I would say absolutely positive. We have a president. We don't have an infirm and decaying person who's pardoning his own family.
That is the baseline level of expectations we should expect from a president. Elementary presence, I suppose, cognition, a capability to speak extemporaneously, and be awake when the sun goes down. That's the baseline level. But beyond the baseline level, repealing Joe Biden's executive orders on DEI, gender ideology, the climate crisis, counting illegal aliens as residents of states for the purposes of reapportionment, pandemic stuff, the International Criminal Court, court packing, all that stuff is gone. And by virtue of it just being gone, we're in a better position, to say nothing of the affirmative actions that Donald Trump has taken in the last 24 hours to increase American energy exploration and exploitation, addressing the immigration crisis, withdrawing from the WHO, on and on and on. All of that's laudable.
I want to say, no, I began the show by dealing with Elon Musk not being a Nazi. Do you agree with me on that that was not a Nazi salute?
Yeah, well, yes, I do, but I could also defer to organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, which isn't exactly a shrinking violet when it comes to accusing Republicans of engaging in anti-Semitic gestures or acts. And they gave him a clean bill of health on this one, which seems obvious if you watch the actual clip. He's making this sort of exaggerated gesture. I'm literally saying previously, my heart goes out to you, clutching where his heart was, and then extending his arm out into the crowd as if to project his heart into the crowd. It makes really perfect sense when you watch it live. But ADL got so much flack for this, and Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the CEO over there, got so much flack for this. You have to think that it's like he gave up the game. They think that if every oar isn't rowing in the same direction, if all progressive engines are not trying to work you over and convince you, shape your perceptions of reality through rhetoric, then the trick's going to fail. It's not going to work out. So they got to police their own members. They got more angry at ADL and John Greenblatt than they got at any Republican who was pushing back on this thing. And I think that's very telling.
No, the second subject, birthright citizenship. I've been teaching Wong Kim Ark for 25 years, the 1898 case about birthright citizenship. It's not directly on point for many of the people who are born in the country because their parents are not legally domiciled here, but I believe it is going to lead the Supreme Court to confirm that everyone born in the United States is a citizen, and that will be a relief. We'll close the door on a cracked open door, and we'll get it over with. It's probably going to be 9-0, might be 8-1 or 7-2. I don't know for sure, but it's definitely going to be upheld. Is there any downside to the President of the United States putting that before the court so they can answer conclusively that people born in the United States are American citizens?
Well, if it's purely a test case, then probably not. If it is policy, and this order does suggest it could be. It is very expansively written to the degree that it also renders the children of individuals who are in this country on visas, tourist visas, work visas, travel visas, what have you, that they are also no longer subject to the 14th Amendment. And if they tried to enforce that, you could have some really bad images that would have a long tail. It's not hard to demagogue this thing. You find a
What?
child, 2 years old, knows nothing of her home country, all of a sudden has to be shipped back to Bangladesh, is a very sympathetic figure. And
It
it's
will be
not hard to make
enjoined
that
and it will be enjoined and adjudicated very quickly. Now to the J6. I did not want any commutations for those convicted of seditious conspiracy, but as Eli Lake said on the commentary podcast this morning, hundreds of people were overcharged. The Supreme Court's already ruled on that. Hundreds of people were overcharged. I know one of the defense counsel for the J6, shipwreck crew, and 22 years of federal prosecutor. There was a lot of prosecutorial abuse going on here. However, do you think Donald Trump simply decided to get this off his desk with one fell swoop so he could focus on big things?
Maybe, but I think this has a long tail on it. Look, we were lied to. We were point blank lied to. And it made sense that we were lied to. That people like J.D. Vance said, obviously, we're only going to pardon nonviolent offenders. Donald Trump himself said, I'm going case by case. And if they were nonviolent, I think they have been greatly punished. And, Speaker Mike Johnson, on and on, telling us a very reasonable thing, which is that we should observe elementary discretion between violent and nonviolent offenders. They asked us to observe that scrupulous distinction, and then they didn't observe it themselves. They had no
Not
intention
to our
of observing
knowledge.
it themselves.
Not to our knowledge. I'm a lawyer, so I've got to point out we don't know what the process
just-
was leading up to this. I
I
don't.
just published 7,000 words on left-wing violence, and left-wing violence occurs because of agitation from the left. But it also occurs in response to the perception of violence on the right, sometimes real, sometimes just perceived. But political violence begets other actions of political violence. It is reciprocal, it is cyclical. And the reason why we have an epidemic of political violence in this country today is because both sides of the political spectrum do not apply consistency when evaluating episodes of political violence.
But with that, I
We're
got
gonna
1
get
minute
more
left.
of it,
I'm
and we
going to go
should
read your
expect more.
7,000 words, Noah. Where are the 7,000 words at National Review?
It is commentary. It is the lead article in the February issue of Commentary Magazine.
What's the title of it?
It's called A Clockwork Blue.
Oh, I heard you talking about this on the pod.
Yeah.
Yes, I heard you
Yes.
talking about this on the pod. The question of who struck John, what begets what, is not at this point, I think, useful to everyone. But we need to go forward. And actually, can I keep you for another segment, Noah? Because I got to talk to you. Are you pressed? Because I want to ask you, go look at Haviv Rettig Gur X account during the break and the incident at Columbia today. Because
I saw that.
I want Trump to bring the Division of Civil Rights, the FBI, and the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education down hard on Columbia tomorrow, if not tonight, in order to stop this. Because political violence doesn't always end in bloodshed. It sometimes ends in intimidation. And Columbia is aiding and abetting intimidation of the worst sort against Jews on their campus. Noah, during the break, I don't know if you had a chance to see the clip of Professor Avi Shalom at Columbia teaching the class on the modern history of Israel being interrupted by Tentifada people. What do you make of that? How would you like President Trump's Department of Justice, FBI, and Department of Education to respond?
Well, first of all, I would like to see universities pursue a policy that makes the kind of masking in which they were engaged, covering themselves in keffiyeh in order to shield their identities, that makes that, if not prohibited, then at least stigmatized significantly. But the DOJ Civil Rights Division, I believe, is fully obliged, and within their rights, to sue colleges and universities for infringements of the students' civil rights who are subject to this kind of treatment. They are not just having their educational experience disrupted, they are being targeted with discrimination based arguably on creedal discrimination.
It's actually a crime, Noah. You can prosecute people for the violation of the civil rights of individuals. Now Columbia is probably not chargeable, though they are sanctionable. Those students are chargeable, and I don't think this is going to stop until people get charged.
No, that's the thing is that, and this is part of the reason why I'm so frustrated with the pardoning of January 6 defendants who committed violent acts and were convicted with mountains of evidence indicating that they engaged in violent acts. That sort of thing is a deterrent against criminality, against violence. And, Joe Biden pardoning Leonard Peltier erodes that stigma. Donald Trump pardoning violent J6 protesters erodes that stigma. We're all playing with excusing, if not rationalizing and possibly excusing the sort of violence that is engaged on behalf of uh, causes that are proximate to our own ideological proclivities. And that's really dangerous. It's a two-way street. And it's the sort of thing that won't stop until we apply a consistent, across the board value judgment that political violence is per se wrong. Point
But no,
blank.
I do
There
want
is
to
no excuse for it.
There is no excuse for it. However, I do believe that attacks on the Capitol have been deterred rather significantly by the largest FBI investigation in history and all of those prosecutions. I have not seen one prosecution of any campus incident in the past 2 years. Have you?
Not in the campuses, no. Not that it comes to mind, which isn't to say that they haven't happened. I just haven't seen them. There have been prosecutions of individuals who engage in violence, vandalism, and menacing civilians in American cities, for example, when they get off campus. Then they're subject to the jurisdiction of law enforcement. But public safety officers on these campuses, they don't enforce those rules. And colleges, when they invite these police officers onto campus, they usually defer to the campus regulations, which are sometimes often are pretty lax. Columbia actually got pretty fed up with this, as I recall, late in 2023, early 2024, and did roll up these encampments and did allow the NYPD to police their campuses. But it certainly hasn't lasted. And these colleges need to have some spine inserted into their backs. I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but giving them cover through the Justice Department might allow them to do what they would otherwise want to do, but feel they can't just because they're so beholden to progressive pressure groups.
I think that's exactly right. And unless and until that happens from D.C., it's going to continue. Noah Rothman, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure in this golden age of America to have you join me. I appreciate it much. David Drucker, he of the Dispatch, joins me. David, how are you?
I'm good, Hugh. Thank you.
Quite a week in Washington, D.C. What did you think of the president's speech yesterday upon being sworn into office for the second time?
And here I thought you wanted to talk about Ohio State winning the national championship.
I've already done that. My audience might turn me off, especially my Notre Dame fan, and there are plenty of them out there.
Fair enough. Listen, the thing I will say about President Trump is he's very transparent. What he talked about in his speech was exactly what he campaigned on. In fact, I thought that the inaugural speech sounded very, very much like one of his campaign speeches. And, then he got to work doing a lot of the things he said he was going to do on day one. And I think, there are Americans watching that were pleased with what they heard, Americans watching that weren't. And ultimately, I think he's going to be judged at least initially on the border and inflation. And if he handles those two things the way a lot of people want him to handle them, and even in the ways that his critics may never come around, but they'll still be happy about a controlled border and about lower inflation, he's going to set himself up to be able to do some of the other things that he's talked about that don't necessarily have as broad of support as dealing with the border and inflation. I will say, lastly, what struck me is just somebody that was looking for details in there was that he talked about taking back the Panama Canal, and it was almost quote unquote there, we're going to take it back. And then he talked about part of this golden age that he says is coming is going to include territorial expansion. Those were his words. He didn't elaborate. And I'm very curious what those two things mean in practice.
Now, I interpreted the Panama Canal remarks as a message to the Chinese Communist Party and General Secretary Xi. Not at Panama, though the rates they charge our ships might be too high. I don't know. But I think he's talking about we don't want the Chi-Coms at both ends of the canal. We'll see. I also tend to believe, David, that the pardons of the J6 folks, and I'm not happy with commuting the sentences of the seditious conspirators, but I think he is clearing the decks so that he can focus on the two bigs, growth and inflation and the border. What do you think of my assessment of why he did what he did yesterday?
Well, look, I mean, Hugh, look, you're a longtime observer of this, so I don't want to say you're wrong because you look at some things differently than I do, and are right often enough. I don't think one thing has anything to do with the other, but it is something he said he was going to do. He ran on it, and so he did it. I do think that President Biden made it politically easier for Trump to do this because of the last minute pardons for all members of his family, for some of these, pardons covering people that didn't do anything that he says needs to be protected. In other words, and Democrats have talked about President Biden's abuse of the pardon power. And so it muddies the water politically and doesn't allow Democrats who want to be critical of what they believe is President Trump's abuse of the pardon power to really do anything with it. And again, it's something the new president, said he was going to do, so it's hardly a surprise.
You know what's interesting about that, David? I listened to Commentary Pod this morning, and John Podhoretz was saying, "Oh, Donald Trump stepped on the story of the Biden pardons by issuing his own pardon." You've just said the opposite. To me, all of it is old news. We're in a war with the Chi-Coms, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and we got to get serious about the border and getting growth back. And I just think the important things ought to be the important things. Do you think the media will get around to covering the important things like the important things?
Well, I think they will. I mean, look, it was still a major action to take to pardon the January 6th offenders. And so it's going to be reported. I do think we learned politically that what happened on January 6th wasn't as salient as some of these other things, the border, inflation, instability around the world. And so I don't think President Trump really had anything to fear, at least for the time being, by following through on this campaign commitment. I think that moving ahead, especially Trump, as energetic as he is with, whether it's things he says or things he does, I think that's going to get the lion's share of the coverage. How different, media entities cover him, we'll see. But, look, I'm focused, and I can only control myself on what he's doing, trying to both interpret what he says and cover what he does. I think that's a lot more interesting. But some of these things are still going to get attention.
Well, it's a blizzard of paper. And I don't know that anyone, I can't even get good numbers on the J6 stuff, nor am I particularly interested in it, as I think almost everyone has been prosecuted, most of them punished, and that it's gone on far too long. I am not going to spend more time on it. I am going to spend a lot of time on the legacy media trying to call Elon Musk a fascist, David. It's as though TDS, is it incurable?
I mean, listen, Hugh, I've seen all sorts I have seen from both sides of the aisle people become obsessed with presidents they don't like and people associated with them. I mean, Elon Musk, he's a particularly provocative figure. If you follow him on X and you read his posts, I think that's enough to say some of the things he does and says are provocative. And he's a major figure, and that's just the way it is.
But he is not a Nazi. He did not give a Nazi salute. It is objectively the case. I watched it like 3 times. There is no way that anyone who is not ignorant of the Nazi salute says that was a Nazi salute. And, I heard everyone on commentary agreeing with me this morning. I'm glad. I haven't heard anyone say yet, yeah, that's a Nazi salute, who isn't nuts.
Yeah, well, it didn't strike me as a Nazi salute. I mean, it struck me as somebody who focuses often on communications and symbolism, and how things are going to be reported, that if I were advising him, I might have advised him to do something different. But, as somebody that is well attuned to anti-Semitism and how that manifests, I didn't look at that and say, there goes another Nazi.
Neither did the ADL, Anti-Defamation League. David M. Drucker of the Dispatch can be found on X and every week right here. Thank you, David. Time to check the market. They've had a very good day. Spectacular day. All right. Everything is green. The Dow is up more than 500 points. The S&P up 52. The Nasdaq up more than 130. Gold today is at $2,757 an ounce. Now, I bought gold the week before last, from AmericanFederal.com, our sponsor. And our gold sponsor, Nick Grovich, and I talked on the phone, sent him the money, he's sending me the gold, and that's what I do every year. And I do it every year in January in order to avoid buying high and selling low. I never sell it. It's not a tradable. If you want to trade things, go find gold stocks or something like that. But if you want to have an actual diversification of your portfolio of wealth into precious metals, gold or silver, some people like platinum and screwball stuff like that. Not me. I'm not a big believer in crypto. I'm not a believer in crypto at all. I own no crypto. But I do own gold. And I buy gold from Nick Grovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com. You can call him, 800-221-7694. Been a sponsor of my show for a year, and I'm very grateful for that. I trust him. I know him. I sat down with him. I went over all of it. If you're one of those people who love the passion, you have a coin collecting hobby, you can also call Nick at 800-221-7694, or you can go to AmericanFederal.com. But as Nick told one of my buddies who referred into him, look, I used to do a lot more of that than I do now. The market's kind of wacky, but let's talk about your stuff. And it's an inherited coin collection, as is usually the case. Nick still does some of that, but I'm telling you, what I encourage people to do is to diversify at least 10% of your wealth into dirt and or gold, because it doesn't go anywhere. The dirt doesn't go anywhere. Even the people who lost everything in the fire still own the real estate, right? The people who saw their lives, collections, and possessions burned down still own the dirt. And unless they had the gold at home, they'll still own the gold. And I haven't seen yet that any bank buildings burned down in LA and any safety deposit boxes melted. I haven't seen any of that stuff yet, nor have I seen an Ocean's 13 kind of robbery. So I'm very high on some of your wealth being in precious metals. Now, I don't believe in trading it. It's at $2,757. That's more than I bought it for. I could sell it, I guess, for a little bit. That's not the point. The point is diversify, diversify, diversify. I'm very heavy into cash right now and into gold. I've got some stocks. I own Palantir. It's the last stock I own individually outside of mutual funds. And because I'm not sure about the rest of the world. I'm not sure about the tariff policy. I will wait and see. The markets boom, I'm going to miss it. That's okay. But I'm not going to lose the money I invested in gold, because gold has more than kept up with inflation for the past 100 years. I think it's going to continue to do so. Go to AmericanFederal.com. Call Nick at 1-800-221-7694. Brett Baer is up next with some thoughts on the amazing day that was yesterday and what's ahead in the golden age of America. First full day of that. I'm joined by Brett Baer, host of Special Report, which you can watch every night, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on the Fox News channel. Last night, Brett was out at the balls. I was watching balls as the Ohio State Buckeyes, beloved of every Buckeye in the land, won the national championship. Brett, did you sneak a peek at your phone during the balls?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I only went to a couple of events, and I definitely was watching the score. And congratulations to your Buckeyes.
It was a wonderful game, and the Irish fought on all the way to the end. Brett, I was curious to ask you, not about any of the big headlines. There are a lot of headlines, but 48 hours before the inauguration, everything changes. It goes indoors. What happened? I mean, take us behind the scenes of what happens when that happens.
Well, first of all, the logistics of moving everything is really a big feat. And for the inaugural committee, that's a big deal. But for all the networks, you got to scramble and change your whole process. And so, the going discussion was about the safety of patrons and the worry about cold and the wind chill. I will say that I have a suspicion that it dealt with a little bit more than that, and maybe security. I know security was very happy that it was inside, and it was much easier to secure.
Now, in terms of your guest lineup, your coverage of it, did you have to throw everything up in the air? Because then they went to the Capital One Center to do a rally for an additional 25 to 30,000 people who couldn't get into the visitor center or the rotunda. Did you have to scramble all the jets and figure it out all over again?
Yeah, I mean, we had to reposition people. We had to figure out how to get from point A to point B, how the pool cameras are going to work. Yeah, there was a lot of logistics. But the overall coverage of it was basically the same. Martha and I in a set that was created looking over the Capitol. And, I think we did 6 hours and then 7 hours with special report. And we had a blockbuster day. I think it's going to end up being the second most watched cable news event in history.
Oh my goodness! I think it was a day full of news, and the news just keeps coming. I am interested what you'll lead special report with tonight. Is it going to be the J6 pardons? Is it going to be the terror attack in Tel Aviv? Is it going to be something else that has happened that I'm only dimly? I mean, what do you pick from any of these things?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I think the reaction to the J6 pardons obviously is still filtering in. There will be a press conference here with this announcement shortly at the White House about a public-private operation with OpenAI and Larry Ellison and trying to create this data center massive investment that the president's going to talk about. And I assume there's going to be some questions there that also could create news. So whatever it is, it's going to come out of the White House. And I'm going to anchor the show from the White House since it's the first full day of the Trump administration part 2. So I'll be on the North Lawn of the White House, and then I'll have an interview with the businessman, the OpenAI, and Larry Ellison and others there on the driveway of the North Lawn.
No, it's a very interesting. OpenAI is actually going to change, or AI generally is going to change all of our lives a lot more than the pardons of the J6 folks. And I have discussed those at length already. Wouldn't have advised him to commute the seditious conspiracy people, would have advised him to commute a whole bunch of the people who've served their time or pardon some who were wandering around the Capitol. But how long do you think this will remain a story, Brett Baer?
Well, I think that, Hugh, it's like drinking from a fire hose. And so the fire hose keeps on putting out more news. And I think that it's not going to be that big of a story. He dealt with it last night in that essential press conference as he was signing executive orders in the Oval Office, saying that most of these people have served 3 years, and it is a political tough thing to swallow for some of the Republicans who are adamant that it should be a case-by-case basis and it shouldn't be across the board in a blanket deal. But I do think that it will move on, and the news will continue to move.
Now, Brett, how do you, being a former Pentagon correspondent, how do you understand what the president said about the Panama Canal yesterday?
Well, I think, he said it more blatantly than he has said it. We need to take that back, I think, is the words he used. And, Panama was quick to put out a statement. Taking it back obviously has implications about, our use of force. And I don't think it comes to that. I think it's a negotiation, and one in which negotiator Donald Trump goes to business on putting pressure on Panama.
Yeah, I don't really think he's talking about a George H.W. Bush invasion of Panama so much as he's saying we want the Chinese communists out of the control of any facilities bordering the canal. And that's a good place to end up with this. Do you think that's what's really going on here, that was a message of Xi, not whoever is running the Panama Canal?
I do think that. I think this is all about China, actually. I think Panama is about China. I think Greenland is about China. Not only rare earth minerals, but also passageways. I think it is about countering China's influence. And this is going to be, I think, one of the biggest foreign policy battles that happened during the Trump administration is the relationship with China, and do we come, head to head with them in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I think the tariffs are about China as well, Brett. Last question. How are you going to ever cover tariffs? I run from it like Superman from kryptonite. I don't want to deal with tariffs. They're boring, they're complicated, they're difficult to deal with. How are you going to cover that?
Well, I'm going to cover the economic impact and also the power of the negotiating tool. I think, there's all kinds of people who have weighed in. Jamie Dimon has said he understands it to be Trump's, negotiating tool of choice, and he thinks it will move the needle on a number of things. Look, it's already changed Canada, and I think that there's a lot of fear that it's actually coming down the pike. And what does that mean in foreign policy and other things? And then the back end is, how does it affect Americans in their pocketbook or at their kitchen table budget? So, all sides of that.
Godspeed to the North Lawn, and I hope you have a heater for your feet, Brett Baer. We'll be watching Special Report tonight. Going to be a little chilly out there on the set tonight, but good on you. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah.
I want to bring Dwayne in right now. Generalissimo, 864.
644.
We didn't hear that. 864.
644.
1900. That's
864.
644.
1900.
What's that the number for?
MyPhDweightloss.com.
MyPhDweightloss.com. 864.
644.
1900 are the tribbles. Those, for the benefit of people who are just tuning in for the first time, tribbles are people who listen for years to the after show that Dwayne no longer does. Dwayne does Dwayne's World Now, a podcast that you ought to subscribe to and listen to. But the tribbles carry on a conversation somewhere in the Ethernet. Where are they gathered?
That would be the Universe. Universe.com. There is a chat room within those confines.
And were they drinking heavily yesterday?
They don't actually drink a ton.
Yesterday. I said yesterday.
They actually don't drink a ton yesterday.
Did you hear
or
George
ever.
call yesterday?
I did.
Sounded a little woozy to me.
Okay. That's fine.
So, in the meantime, has anyone else among the tribbles done what you did with MyPhDweightloss.com, which is lose 50 pounds, keep it off for 2 years?
Yes. Maybe not 50 pounds, but William, a friend I golf with that's locally, he went on the program and lost a ton of weight.
That's using the word golf liberally.
He's actually not too bad.
No, I'm talking about you.
Oh, this is true. I don't get to golf very much.
All right, so there is someone, but how about any of the tribbles?
I've heard from, 3 or 4 triples that have actually tried it.
Who used to be prosperous and no longer look prosperous?
Who are a little less prosperous than they used to be.
That is how I refer to people who may be a pound or two over their playing weight, which is, you're looking prosperous today. I learned that from the guy who sold me suits at Nordstrom forever. Still does. Mark, if you're listening, thank you. And some years I come and he says, you're looking prosperous this year. Code word, you put on 10 pounds. And now he says, what in the world are you doing? I said, I'm out on the highways and byways of wherever I am. 864.
644.
1900. I'm coming back at the next segment with an exchange between Marco Rubio and Craig Melvin on the Today Show. And I want to play this for you because Craig is a great reporter. I think he's a really fine reporter. And Secretary Rubio is a key player right now in the world. All right, so the world is looking at the U.S. and China, U.S. and Iran, U.S. and the Ukraine-Russian war, the U.S. and the ceasefire. There are a lot of big things to ask the Secretary of State, the newly minted Secretary of State about. This morning, a newly minted Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. First interview, Craig Melvin, NBC, Today Show. After 2 minutes of questions about the J6 pardons, Secretary Rubio has had it. Cut number 12.
As you know, President Trump, as you just heard there as well, pardoned nearly all 1,600 of the January 6th defendants. I recall that you said shortly after the attack on the Capitol, where you were that day, that it was one of the saddest days in American history. And then you went on to say this, Mr. Secretary.
My entire life with and alongside people who came to America fleeing countries plagued by political violence and by chaos. Today, America looked like the countries that they came here to get away from. Vladimir Putin loved everything that happened today because what happened is better than anything he could have ever come up with to make us look like we're falling apart.
Mr. Secretary, what message does pardoning nearly all of them send to the rest of the world?
Well, we're going to focus on what makes America stronger and more prosperous and safer. I'm not going to engage in domestic political debates. I can't in the role at State Department. My job is to focus on the president's foreign policy, and it's going to be a foreign policy that's frankly as straightforward as any in modern times, and that is that the priority of the Department of State of the United States is going to be the United States, and that's what we're going to focus on. Is today we'll have a meeting with a quad with foreign ministers from Australia and India and Japan to reaffirm the importance of working with allies across the world on the things that are important to America and Americans, and that's what I'm focused on moving forward. And so, I hope you guys will all understand. I mean, my days, at least in the time I'm at Department of State, of engaging in domestic politics will be put aside as I focus on the affairs that the United States has around the world and the engagements we have to make our country a safer, stronger, more prosperous place.
I want to talk about foreign policy in just a moment, but really quickly. I mean, who's to say that if a crowd of folks who are displeased with something that happens at the Capitol in the future, who's to say that they don't just do it again?
Yeah, I know, and I understand. I mean, but I think it's unfortunate. Our first engagement, as I agree to come on this morning with you, I'm going to be working on foreign policy issues, and you want to revisit these issues that are going on in domestic politics. It's not going to happen. If you have questions for me about foreign policy and engaging in the world, I'll be happy to talk to you about those.
Good for you, Secretary Rubio. I think every minute that you spend with someone in authority as a journalist, that you're not asking them about their wheelhouse. In this case, let's talk about the Panama Canal, Mr. Secretary. Is that a message to Panama, or is that a message to the Chinese Communist Party that is operating part of the canal? Or you want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war and what can be done there, or whether or not the ceasefire will hold? There are so many things to ask a newly minted Secretary of State about, not about the pardons, but they can't let it go. I need you to understand, legacy media is disease, not Craig. Craig got asked or told or given prompts. That tape didn't magically fall from the sky. All the little junior NBC producers are out there, and they're from the resistance, and they have TDS, and they're out there eager to roast the new Secretary of State on a perceived weakness of Trump, not understanding what Secretaries of State do. And I'm just disappointed that we have a legacy media in ruins. I'm not disappointed that Fox News is picking up the pieces and the Salem News Channel is picking up the pieces of the rot in legacy media. I'm just disappointed that even very good journalists like Craig get handed cards like that. Meanwhile, Elise Stefanik, I love our future UN ambassador, cut number 6, at a hearing today on her confirmation with Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut.
Does it concern you that those elements of the neo-Nazi and white supremacist element in the United States believe that what they saw last night was a neo-Nazi salute?
What concerns me is these are the questions you believe are most important to ask to the UN ambassador. I have a very strong record when it comes to combating anti-Semitism. We just had a historic election where President Trump earned historic support from American voters because of his strong leadership combating anti-Semitism, which has been a scourge across the country, skyrocketing since October 7th. So I intend to bring moral clarity to this position and continue to speak out as a voice, as a beacon of light, condemning anti-Semitism at the United Nations, which is representative of President Trump's record and President Trump's promises that he made on the campaign trail.
You are right.
And she continued to really demonstrate the sort of moral clarity we will need at the UN, cut number 7.
Because if you look at the anti-Semitic rot within the United Nations, there are more resolutions targeting Israel than any other country, any other crisis combined. And we have significant national security councils, the anti-Semitism, whether it's UN Women failing to condemn Hamas's terrorist attack and terrorist regime against innocent civilian women, using rape and targeting women, specifically taking them hostage. I am overjoyed that those 3 young women hostages were returned home. We need to stay committed to ensuring every hostage is brought home. I've met with many hostage families. This position, we need to be a voice of moral clarity. on the UN Security Council and at the United Nations at large for the world to hear the importance of standing with Israel. And I intend to do that. This year will mark the 50th year since the disgraceful Zionism is Racism resolution at the United Nations. And at the time, our U.S. Ambassador, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, spoke out strongly against that disgraceful resolution. That is the type of leadership that I hope to bring, if confirmed, to the United Nations. And President Trump has a tremendous record when it comes to standing with Israel, whether it's the Abraham Accords, whether it's his commitment to combating anti-Semitism, or recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. This is a strong, strong record, and I hope to do that at the UN if confirmed.
I think Elise Stefanik is going to be fabulous. I know that Andrew and Todd are absolutely fabulous. AndrewandTodd.com are sponsors of my show. They are also mortgage lenders and have been for 20-plus years. You can call them at 888-888-1172. They're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. I got an inquiry during the break from someone who needs a mortgage, and I'm sending them Andrew's contact, 888-888-1172. They're moving inside the Beltway from point A to point B because their family's getting bigger, so they got to move. And, right now, the 30-year interest rate's at 7%, give or take a quarter point. And that's rough. It's not going to come down for a year and a half of Donald Trump's tenure. It's going to take a while to get productivity up. But you don't have to wait. You can always refinance later. What you need to do is call 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. Or go to their website, andrewandtodd.com. Pretty hard to forget it. Even though they were Sierra Pacific, they're an office within Sierra Pacific, and they have their own office, andrewandtodd.com. No matter where you are in the United States, you can call 888-888-1172 and talk to Andrew. I talked to him last week about the fires, and he told me, anyone out there who needs counseling, no charge, call us up. We'll talk to you about what we know and how we can help you. But if you're inside the Beltway and you're moving back to D.C. with a new administration, or you're leaving because you were part of Team Biden and you're going home and you've got to buy a house wherever you're going to, call AndrewandTodd.com. It's nonpartisan. It's about interest rates. It's about service. It's about people who will not oversell or allow you to buy too much house. 888-888-1172. Joined now by Andrew C. McCarthy, former Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, National Review contributing editor, author extraordinaire, host, along with Rich Lowry of the McCarthy Report, and commentator on Fox News. Andy, welcome to the first full day of the Golden Age. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great, Hugh. You started me with the cranberries. What could be better than that?
I know, but I got to tell you, I thought maybe you might be depressed. I don't know if you're an Irish fan or a Buckeyes fan. I'm a Buckeyes guy, so I had a great day yesterday. I'm not sure about you.
Yeah, well, I don't follow it as close as I used to, and I went to Columbia where I think they scored maybe 100 points the 4 years I was there. So I just look at you guys with envy.
Well, I didn't go to Ohio State. I'm just from the great state of Ohio, so
right.
I'm just a Buckeye. Andrew, the topic of the day are the pardons. Now, there's a lot of news out there. News is where you look, but everyone's looking at the pardons. So I want to start with the lead, the 1,500 pardons and commutations that the president gave. My position is I would have advised him not to commute the sentences of the seditious conspirators, and I would have done a more careful review of the case by case to find if anyone really did violence against a police officer that he was letting out. But generally, it's such a bollocksed up set of numbers. What are the numbers? What kind of numbers are we talking about here?
Well, I think to understand it, the framework of this is that the riot was a condemnable act. Most of us said that at the time. That doesn't turn it into an insurrection any more than a murder is a terrorist attack.
Yes.
And for political reasons, the Democrats tried to exaggerate what was already an awful thing into a historically awful thing, like a terrorist attack on a par with 9/11. And, of course, it didn't have those kind of consequences. In fact, it was a 3-hour riot that was the property damage was so minimal, Congress was able to reconvene that night. And it's simply not true. I think this is part of the reason that people get angry. It's repeatedly said 5 police officers were killed, 8 no police officers were killed in the Capitol riot. The closest one was Officer Sicknick, who died of strokes the day after the riot. But the two guys they charged in connection with him, they charged with assault. They didn't claim that it was a homicide. So they had a situation that was not a terrorist attack, and they tried to portray it as one. And the way they did that was to charge about 1,000 people who ordinarily under Justice Department standards would never be charged. These were misdemeanors. They were nonviolent offenses. It was things like, being in a restricted area and parading. And those cases should never have been charged in the first place. I don't have a lot of heartburn about those pardons. I think those people were treated much more severely than they would ordinarily have been treated under Justice Department rules. On the other hand, you have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 or more people who were charged with either assaults on police officers or property damage or both. Now, a number of those cases were overcharged. I happen to have been a federal prosecutor who convicted people of seditious conspiracy. I don't think those charges were valid. I think they would have been reversed on appeal. That's not to say those defendants didn't commit serious offenses. I think anyone who assaulted police officers should have been severely sentenced, and those sentences shouldn't have been pardoned or commuted. So I think what you have is a mess. You have a situation where Democrats try to turn this into something that it wasn't, and President Trump has begun his term by rewarding people who assaulted police officers. So I come away from the whole thing just shaking my head.
Now, I came to the conclusion, I think given my knowledge of the president's approach, he decided to just sweep it off his desk. He's got bigger things to do. And that this case-by-case stuff would have gone on forever, and he just wants to put it behind him. And against the backdrop of the Biden family pardon, we have a minute to the break, Andy, so I want to get your quick reaction. I think he just felt liberated by the Biden pardon to say, out, damn spot, and get rid of all of it.
I think that's right. I think the Biden pardons were so abusive, and they cut completely against what people said, was it 4 years ago, when a number of the same people, when there was talk about Trump doing preemptive pardons, all the Democrats went crazy and said, how could you do something like that, including Biden? And here he did it. So I think it kind of overwhelms Trump's part.
Andy, I listened to the commentary pod this morning. Eli Lake began by saying, look, hundreds of people were overcharged on the J6 stuff. And I think he's right. At the same time, Noah Rothman is very upset with the predicate it lays down for political violence being excused. All of this having been said, are we at a place where we can get a fresh start for the Department of Justice to take all those agents who've been devoted to J6 cases and all those prosecutors and tell them to go after the Chinese spies in the United States and maybe the criminals who came in over the border illegally?
I think if we're 8 months down the road from today and it's clear that lawfare is a thing of the past and that the Trump Justice Department is actually trying to address crime, especially in one-party blue cities around the country where we haven't had real law enforcement in a number of years, then what happened yesterday will be a blip, if anyone remembers it at all.
Okay, I agree with that. Now let me talk to you about what happened in Columbia today. Masked students broke into the History of Modern Israel class and disrupted it. I can't even believe it's ongoing. If you were acting Attorney General McHenry, would you dispatch Division of Civil Rights attorneys and FBI agents to investigate this? Because until and unless people like this are punished, it's going to keep happening.
Yes, I have said since the violence and harassment of Jewish students on American campuses began after October 7th, that this would stop in 5 minutes if the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division was serious about enforcing the civil rights laws for all Americans, not on behalf of Democratic Party selective interest groups. So you could end this with real enforcement of the civil rights laws. Just all you need to do is show you're going to enforce them robustly, and the problem would be over.
Now, Andy, is it in fact a crime to interfere with a class on the basis of the ethnicity of the professor, the subject matter, and the students in the class?
Well, it's a crime to single out people for taking away the enjoyment of their civil rights on the basis of racism, but usually that very serious part of the civil rights laws is reduced to more violent crime. And then there's a broader conspiracy statute, which makes it a crime for two or more people to conspire to prevent anyone from having the enjoyment of their actual civil rights. And that's usually a broader statute that can be charged.
It was the Rodney King statute when the Los Angeles policemen back in the days of the beating of Rodney King were acquitted by the Simi Valley jury. The riots followed, and the DOJ came in and prosecuted for violation of King's civil rights, and the officers went to jail on that. Now, this is not that, but I do think it's a criminal statute, and I think they ought to wield it that way. Andy, in the blizzard of pardons and commutations issued by Joe Biden since the defeat of Kamala Harris in November, 6 family members have been pardoned. 5 of them preemptively, Hunter, of course, after the fact, after his conviction. We also had Leonard Peltier commuted. Let's go in reverse order. What do you make of the Peltier? I doubt Joe Biden could even tell you who Leonard Peltier is.
Yeah, look, it's a disgrace. It's of a piece with the pardons issued by Obama during his term, Bill Clinton during the last part of his term. Remember, on the last day, he pardoned 2 of the Weather Underground terrorists. Obama pardoned one of the FALN terrorists that was so bad even Clinton didn't pardon that one. So there's this thing between, progressive Democratic administrations and, radical leftists. There has always been. It's unfortunate, but it keeps happening.
Do you think we'll find out how it happened? My assumption is some activist on the staff just stuck his name in there. I can't imagine anyone. Joe Biden is not that kind of a leftist, even when he was sentient. Who would do this?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of progressives on Capitol Hill who went to bat for some of the Weather Underground people. So it could be staffers, could be people in Congress, could be both.
Okay, let's move to pardons. Pardons cannot pardon acts that had not occurred prior to the guy's departure. So Biden wiped the slate clean for his family, but not going forward. If they failed to register for the Foreign Agents Registration Act under its provisions, and they are still representing foreign governments or entities, are they committing additional crimes today?
Yeah, anything they do after the moment he signed the pardon is fair game for prosecution, which includes you, and I think this is the most obvious one. They can be called now to testify in the grand jury and before Congress because they no longer have a Fifth Amendment privilege. That's been extinguished because of the pardon. So they can be made to account for the things that are of interest to the public, and if they commit perjury in those appearances, they can be prosecuted for it.
So what would be of interest to you as a prosecutor about James Biden and the other 4 Biden, not named Hunter? I'm not sure. Well, Hunter does know a lot. I guess I'd bring them all in, but I don't want weaponization. Do you consider that weaponization of the Department of Justice?
I think it's hard to make the case for ending lawfare, which I think is the most important thing for the country, and just carve out and say, but we're going to get to the bottom of the Biden thing. I think James Comer's committee did a very good job. They traced $27 million from corrupt and anti-American regimes or their agents to the Biden family coffers. That's political accountability. I've never really cared whether anyone went to jail over that. I thought we needed to know what happened. And I'd be content at this point, you to turn the page in the name of getting rid of lawfare, because it's got to be stopped.
Well, I'm of 2 minds. I want to get rid of lawfare for the same reason you do. It's acid on the body politic. It's burning away the body politic. But if we have sleepers, if we have people under the influence of the Chi-Coms, I want to know who they are. Burisma doesn't worry me so much, but it's the Chinese Communist Party that worries me. Who knows what and when did they know it? Does that matter to you?
What matters to me, and I do think if there was one place where I think Comer's committee could have done more, and there's only so much you can do with a congressional investigation, and this is where prosecutors who have more tools could go further, and that is, I've never believed that the Chinese gave Biden all this money for nothing. And I think one of the interstices, I guess, in this in our knowledge of this whole escapade is, what did the Chinese buy? What benefits did they get policy-wise from the investment they made in the Bidens? I think that's absolutely in the public interest to get to the bottom of that.
Well, you and that, then we're in agreement. I do not want weaponization. I do not want to go after Hillary, for example. I don't want to go after Joe Biden. He's infirm and old, and Robert Hur was right.
Right.
I would like to know if espionage has been conducted and for what ends and what was received. And that is a wholly different investigation than weaponization. Can Pam Bondi articulate that and persuade people, do you think?
I sure hope she can, and I think the best person for her to talk to about this would be Bill Barr, because remember, under Barr, they had a China initiative in the Justice Department, which Biden shut down when he came in, which I always thought was intriguing. I thought that might have been one of the things that China got out of its investment. But they did a lot of work in the Justice Department from about 2018 or so till the end of Trump's first term on China's various ways of boring into parts of our society and parts of our government. And I think she could pick that thread up and run with it.
All right, last question, Nanny. We can go over the break if you take longer than this. I want TikTok gone. I wanted it shut down on the day the law provided for. There is no extension now. The executive branch can always choose priorities over non-priorities. But what do you make of the president's decision not to enforce the law for 90 days?
I think it's a terrible decision. I also think it's somewhat like, I think it kind of is the explanation I've given to people for why there was a Hezbollah-connected guy who was initially on was supposed to give one of the invocations at the inaugural. I think Trump did well with TikTok in the election, so suddenly he likes it more than he used to. He beat Harris with Muslims in Dearborn, so suddenly that he's seeing that differently. I just think that's the way he's wired. He sees electoral success and popularity and has a different view of the national security implications of it. I wish that wasn't the case, but I do see that as a pattern.
Well, we know that there are people like Senator Tom Cotton who will speak very candidly to him about the fact this is a giant Hoover, hoovering up I've lost students this semester, didn't know what that meant, hoovering up every bit of data on people. Do you think Senator Cotton can persuade him?
I sure hope so, but I didn't like what I heard yesterday when Trump was asked about this. He said, look, they're kids, hoovering up what? I don't think he used the word hoover, but he basically said, do you really think the Chinese are spying on American kids? And I think that if that's where he's coming from, he's just rationalizing, because once you're into the users of TikTok, then you're into the non-users of TikTok as well. It's just the nature of the beast.
It's just got to be explained. It's such a menace. There is a storm of news out of Israel. So I turned to former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Dr. Oren is in the United States to celebrate the inauguration. I'll bet you it reminds you of your home place of New York, Michael, because it's got to be cold in D.C. today.
The air is not breathable. If you need an ice pick to breathe.
Not a good thing.
Last night, going into the Liberty Ball, we were stuck outside for about 2 hours in this thing, and people were literally passing out. It is, what can I say, apocalyptic. But it did not hamper the joy of the event. A truly extraordinary experience. And, we've been up for several nights for, balls and receptions. I'm a recovering inauguraholic, probably, you can call it. But with that, also the events in Israel, as you said, the return of the 3 hostages, the question about whether phase 1 of the ceasefire will continue to phase 2 of the ceasefire, the great and fateful questions facing the Israeli government.
What did you make of President Trump's statement yesterday? He wasn't certain that the deal would hold, after having said all hell would break loose if hostages were not getting out.
Well, I think it's very clear. Hamas has never kept a ceasefire. It didn't keep the ceasefire on October 7th. There was a ceasefire in place. It didn't keep the ceasefire a month later when we had the first hostage release. It didn't keep the ceasefire for more than 4 days. And what will happen, I'm willing to wager on it. You're going to see violations of the ceasefire. Hamas is going to say it's not us, it's some breakaway faction. And there'll be some rockets and there'll be some ambushes. And then you have Hamas in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank carrying out terrorist attacks. And well, hey, that's not covered by the ceasefire. So I think the president's words speak for themselves. Certainly, they're backed up empirically by history.
Four more hostages will be released on Saturday. And according to the deal, the details of all 33 of Phase 1 release are supposed to be done this weekend. Do you expect Hamas to at least hang in there through the weekend?
No, not really. They'll always try to strike that. Remember, we're dealing with a terrorist group that deals not just with physical terror, but also emotional and psychological terror all the time. We don't know how many of these hostages are coming back in ambulances, how many are coming back in boxes. We're particularly concerned about the Beavis boys, Ariel and Kfir. They're the youngest hostages. We don't know if they're alive, how they're coming back. And the impact on Israeli society, I guarantee you, will be profound.
Are you surprised to learn this morning that Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi has announced he's retiring in March?
Not at all. I'm surprised he's held on for this long. And what a almost Greek tragic figure he is. Here's a person who's named for an uncle who fell in the 1967 war, a storied paratrooper who fell in the battle for Jerusalem, who now bears responsibility for the greatest single military defeat in Israel's history, certainly since the 1973 October Yom Kippur War. And yet who, without hesitation, didn't break. He didn't break. He came back, and he fought a war on seven fronts. And by all military estimates, what West Point will be studying in 50 years from now, basically won on all 7 fronts. And so, yes, in Israel, no one's above taking responsibility. And he's taken personal responsibility. He's called on the government to take responsibility. Other officers will be following suit. This is going to be a major, major turnover in Israel's military leadership, and I suspect in Israel's political leadership as well.
Ambassador Oren, there's a story in the Financial Times today. Is Hamas back? I'm going to ask you. They were out in force this week with the green bandanas and the black headbands and all of that. Are they back?
Yeah, the question is, are they back in force? They're not back on the force, certainly, that existed on October 7th. They've been vastly downgraded. And the people you see marching around with the green bandanas are the people who have managed to survive somehow. And the only reason they've survived is because of the hostages, not because of Israel's lack of military prowess or stick-to-itiveness. There are areas of Gaza which the Israeli army could not enter because of the fear that hostages were being held there. And we know now, tragically, we know that when we enhance or ratchet up the pressure on Hamas militarily, Hamas doesn't release hostages, Hamas shoots hostages. And so, yes, inevitably, some of these Hamas terrorists will survive.
So, Dr. Oren, you've got Marco Rubio as the new Secretary of State. Michael Waltz is the new National Security Advisor. Pete Hegseth will soon be the Secretary of Defense. What do you make of the new team?
A team. From Israel's perspective, a total A team. Couldn't get any better. I know most of these individuals personally. Extraordinary when it comes to defending Israel, when it comes to standing up to Iran. Couldn't get any better. But I always caution Israelis that these remarkable individuals, as blessed as they are, do not make policy, they carry out policy. And in the American system, policy is made by one individual principally. He can be influenced, he can be persuaded, but he makes that policy, and that individual is Donald Trump.
I'm going to ask Lahav this as well, because she's in Jerusalem, but you know this as well as anyone as well. Times of Israel, IDF launches major counterterror raid in West Bank's Jenin, expected the last days. All I know about the West Bank I learned from Fauda, which means I don't know anything about the West Bank. It's a TV show. What is the likelihood of success in Judea and Samaria of IDF operations over the long haul?
Well, there'll always be success. They'll always be successful. It's not a matter of being successful. The question is whether how much of a respite it buys us from terror. There's always going to be terror there. There always has been terror there since 1967, and it comes in waves. And I think certainly now the sense that Hamas has in Gaza that it's won this round of the battle, that people are parading and celebrating, has given a fillip to Hamas cells in Judea and Samaria, and other jihadist groups in Judea and Samaria, and Israel is acting to defend us against them and to eliminate them. But the others will sprout in their place. So it's an ongoing struggle. Jenin's in the northern part of the West Bank. It's in Samaria, and it's been that area in which Palestinian Authority control has almost disappeared at times. And that vacuum has been filled by Hamas and these other jihadist groups, the Lion's Den, for example, or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They're all acting in the cities of northern Samaria, which is Jenin, Tulkarm, and mostly Nablus. And that's where the Israeli army has had to be the most active.
Do they have a tunnel network up there, or is it simply people with guns in the walls?
Well, they're trying. They're trying with the tunnels. They're trying with rockets. They've got their playbook. And there, the tunnels are more dangerous because that is our longest and most porous border. And we've already discovered tunnels that the Palestinians have started to excavate that have aimed at some of our major cities that are right along that border. Kfar Saba, for example, major Israeli city. And there have been Palestinian gunmen who've just simply gone out in the street and emptied their Kalashnikov magazines in the direction of one of these Israeli cities. Those bullets go a long way. And even at several thousand yards, they'll penetrate a wall and penetrate a human being.
So, Mr. Ambassador, last question. You know everyone in this game, but I don't know Mr. Witkoff, the new special envoy to the Middle East. I know the accounts of the meetings he had with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I don't know if they're true or not. Do you think Israel has won in Lebanon? I want to just focus on Lebanon. Nathan Hochstein spent enough time there to get a passport, I think, from Lebanon, but I don't know that anything is actually secure there. What's your assessment as the new team arrives?
Well, it depends on how you frame the question, and I'll try to make this as short as possible. In purely military terms, Israel has done the impossible. It encountered obstacles both in Gaza, Lebanon, and elsewhere that no other army in history has ever had to grapple with, and in every single front prevailed. And that includes in the air, striking at Yemen, striking at Iran at fantastic distances, refueling in the air, and not losing a single airplane. In purely military terms, Israel is a historic victory. In geostrategic terms, it's a mixed bag. On one hand, Hezbollah is still alive. It can come back. It's still a formidable force. Hamas, as we've mentioned, is still alive and can certainly resurface and regroup and rearm. In the West Bank, as we mentioned, the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria remain pretty much unscathed. And look at the Houthis. The Houthis are still firing at us. But in the long run, and this is a big question, Syria has fallen apart as a result of Israel's military victories. Iran is isolated and weakened in a way that has not been perhaps ever. And hopefully with the Trump administration, Israel and the United States can take advantage of this unique and potentially transformative geopolitical situation in the Middle East and make an entirely new region that will strengthen Israel, strengthen America, strengthen the world, and greatly enhance stability throughout the Middle East and beyond.
Gosh, I hope so. That is certainly the hope. Dr. Michael Oren, ambassador, former ambassador of Israel to the United States. Enjoy the rest of the very cold inaugural celebration week in Washington, D.C. Get a coat, Mr. Ambassador. Get a coat. Lahav Harkov has been with the Jewish Insider for many, many years. She is also currently the senior political correspondent for Jewish Insider. You can follow her on X at Lahav Harkov. She joins me now from Israel. Good evening, Lahav. Thank you for being with me.
Thanks for having me on.
I would like to begin with the confirmation from Hamas today that 4 female hostages will be released on Saturday. Do you think the deal is going to hold beyond those 4?
I think it's a possibility that will hold beyond those 4. I think the more sort of open question is whether it will hold beyond the first 6 weeks. We can also ask if it will hold the entire 6 weeks, but I wouldn't be surprised if it holds for a few weeks. It's just once we get to the point where they're negotiating further stages of the deal, further where they would be releasing soldiers that they're holding captive, and where they would expect the IDF to withdraw more fully from Gaza. I think that those are going to be the sticking points.
Lahav, there are emotional reactions across the range. I read the Times of Israel every day, Jewish Insider, try and get to Ynet, as much English language Israeli media as possible. You're there. first, I'd like to ask, what's your personal response to the agreement?
It's very mixed feelings. I mean, the day that the three women got out, of course, it was incredibly emotional and exciting. And we were all just so happy, really to the point of tears, just seeing these women reunited with their families. That being said, there are really mixed feelings because over 1,000 terrorists are going to be released from Israeli prison, including ones who have murdered many Israelis, committed some of the worst atrocities of the Second Intifada. And you asked me personally. My husband did 200 days of reserve duty since the beginning of the war, and mostly in the West Bank, which is where a lot of these terrorists are going to be. And he's going to have to confront them again. And I think there's tens of thousands of wives, sisters, mothers of soldiers and soldiers on reserve duty who feel the same way, that this is putting them all in danger.
So, in terms of where the terrorists being released are going, they are going to the West Bank. They're not being released into Gaza.
So the ones who are serving life sentences will not be released to the West Bank. So they'll be sent to Gaza, in some cases Turkey or maybe Qatar. It's sort of unclear. They're not giving specific information. But a lot of these people who helped plan things, or maybe they set off a bomb that ended up not killing anyone, so they're not serving a life sentence, they'll go to the West Bank.
Okay. Now, I also read in the Times of Israel story that on Sunday, Hamas is obligated under the agreement to provide the details of all 33 of the hostages who are covered by the first phase, whether they are alive or dead or their condition. Is that a red line for you, that if that list doesn't appear, that Israel ought to withdraw from the agreement?
I think that they should be giving that information in a timely manner before each release each week, right? I believe it's supposed to be 24 hours before the release. Last time they were 18 hours late. And so Israel waited before actually, holding fire and entering the ceasefire until it got that information. So, I think that the information needs to come in a timely manner. I'm not sure exactly whether we're supposed to be getting it all at once or week to week. But certainly if it's not coming in advance, if they're sort of withholding the information and not keeping to the general sort of lines of the deal, then I do think it will become a red line, because how can we trust them moving forward?
All right. There is a lot of news out of Israel today that I'll get to in a second, but I want to ask your personal reaction to the reappearance of Hamas fighters above ground with their bandanas and black hoods and covered faces. Again, Hamas is supposed to have been eradicated, obviously hasn't been. What was your reaction to that?
So, for starters, I don't think that anyone is saying that Hamas was eradicated, including, Israel's leadership. They say, ranging from 80 to 90%. And obviously, when you look at those pictures, they're sort of horrifying, because it looks like Hamas is out in full force again. I know that Israeli intelligence assessments are that even if Hamas is managing to recruit some new people, that they still are seriously degraded, and there's a lot fewer people than before. So I find that somewhat reassuring. But I do believe that Israel still has more work to do. We entered this ceasefire, but if we end the war, if this ceasefire becomes the end of the war, then we will have not reached our objective of eliminating Hamas as a fighting force and a government, certainly not as a governing force in Gaza. I mean, they're very much the only sort of administrative power there.
Now, the surprising hard news from today, I'm so glad you're here today, is that Israeli Defense Forces Chief Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, who we've seen a lot of in the 15 months since the massacre on 10/7, announced he will be leaving the IDF in March, assuming the permission of the political leadership in the Israeli cabinet. Are you surprised by this announcement?
I'm surprised by the timing. I'm not surprised that it eventually came. I think that the IDF sort of top brass were among the first people to take responsibility after October 7th and say that, we really failed and that we are responsible for the failure of the system, the failure to defend the Western Negev, the towns near the Gaza border. So I knew this day would come eventually. I guess he has some level of confidence in this ceasefire that it's going to hold at least long enough to find him a replacement. And so that's why he chose this time.
Well, after the catastrophic failure of 10/7, the IDF has been nothing short of magnificent across 7 fronts. And in fact, the strategic defeat for Iran, coupled with a strategic defeat for Hezbollah and what could well be a strategic defeat for Hamas, we don't know yet, is a salute to the feat of arms done by the IDF. Is that just part? It's not. I'm asking, is there no way to erase culpability for 10/7?
I think that if you ask the average Israeli, they're sort of very proud of what the army has achieved since October 7th, but that people view the leadership as sort of responsible. And, you know, there's a word that people use in Hebrew called the conceptia, which sort of means like a misconception or a preconception. And that people talk about as the failure, which is that just the way that Israel's leadership, which military and civilian, looked at Gaza was so mistaken and helped lead to this October 7th disaster. And so I think that people still view, despite the positive things that have happened since October 7th, they still view the leadership as responsible. I think that's true for the political leadership as well. Even though Netanyahu is rallying in the polls, I think many Israelis think that he should not seek re-election.
I will be right back with Lahav Harkov from the Jewish Insider. You can follow her on X at Lahav Harkov. It's very easy to find, Lavah. Is how you just start to type it and it will pop up. Back now with Lahav Harkov of the Jewish Insider. She is their senior political correspondent, joining us from, I believe, Jerusalem this morning. Lahav, my next question is, who picks the replacement for the head of the IDF when the lieutenant general leaves?
It's the defense minister and the prime minister together, basically. They have to agree on someone. There's already a likely candidate that's already sort of come out, that's the sort of military insiders have written about in Israel. And it's a former general named Eyal Zamir, who's today the director general of the defense ministry. It's sort of like the top bureaucratic position in the defense ministry that many former generals the job's usually filled by a former general.
So he was not in line command on 10/7?
He was not. He was Netanyahu's top choice for chief of staff back in 2021 when Netanyahu was voted out of office. And then that short-lived government, which was around for about a year and a half, they were the ones who appointed the current chief of staff, who just resigned.
Last question, Lahav, because we got about 4 minutes. The headline in the Times of Israel this afternoon is, IDF launches major counter-terror raid in West Bank, Jenin, expected to last days. So the war is on pause in Gaza. It appears to be over in Lebanon. What is the West Bank in terms of threat level?
It's definitely a higher threat level than before October 7th, 2023. That being said, in the months before October 7th, things were pretty hot there. There were a lot of terrorist attacks coming out of the West Bank and a lot of attacks on soldiers in the West Bank. So it's been sort of like an ongoing arena of this war the entire time, even if the intensity has been lower than Gaza. There's a lot of concerns about Iran smuggling weapons over from Jordan into Israel. That border is too porous, and there's a lot of talk about building some sort of physical separation between the West Bank and Jordan now. And so this is meant to eradicate some of that Iranian influence on terrorists in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. For the past month or so, the Palestinian Authority itself has actually been pushing back against this terrorist cell in Jenin, a town that has long been problematic in terms of the influence of extremists. But the Palestinian Authority was not having enough success in that realm for Israel. And so now the IDF is going in for a more intensive operation in the coming days.
So, Lahav, like many Americans, my knowledge of the West Bank is based on Fauda and what I can read in English language sources. Do you think Americans have any idea of the complexity of urban warfare against terrorist guerrillas in the West Bank?
I don't, but to be fair, I don't think most Israelis understand really what's going on in the West Bank day to day. It's very complicated. It's also very close to Israelis. I mean, there are parts of Israel, the sort of non-West Bank parts of Israel that are only a few miles wide, and so regardless of whether one believes in a two-state solution or not, an unstable West Bank with a lot of extremists endangers, pre-1967 Israel and Greater Israel, no matter what, people think the solution should be.
Last question, Lahav, and thanks for the extra time. In Fauda, it is presented that the Palestinian Authority works with Shin Bet and other agencies inside of the Israeli government to try and keep a lid on the most radical extremists. Is that in fact true, or is the PAA just taking the money and running?
It is and it isn't. There are definitely cases where the PA will turn people into Israel because they themselves don't want to take care of certain extremist elements, because they're worried that if they're seen as the people who are arresting these people, then they'll be less popular. It'll destabilize the Palestinian Authority. And there is some cooperation. It sort of ebbs and flows depending on the relations between Ramallah and Jerusalem. That being said, the Palestinian Authority also pays monthly salaries to the families of terrorists in prison and the families of terrorists who are killed while committing acts of terror, which is a clear incentive. The salary that they pay every month is higher than the average salary in the Palestinian Authority. And the textbooks and the television programs that are controlled by the government all feature incitement against Israel and against Jews. And so, there's some cooperation, but sort of as culturally and societally and also financially, the Palestinian Authority is encouraging terrorism.
Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation down the road, Lahav. Thank you for joining me for your first time on the Hugh Hewitt Show and for staying up late in Israel to do that. Very greatly appreciated. Lahav Harkov, you can follow her on X at Lahav Harkov, not Hard, or at Jewish Insider, where the editor-in-chief, our friend Josh Kraushaar, has got a superstar working for him over in Israel itself in Lahav. Since I started my national show in July of 2000, until I moved to the mornings, I had a weekly guest, James Lilacs, who is one of the preeminent bloggers from the age of blogging, National Review columnist, architecture critic for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and one of the wildly entertaining Substack journalists out there at jameslilacs.substack.com, host also of The Diner podcast everywhere. But he wouldn't get up in the morning, would not get up in the morning. So he's back now that I've returned to the afternoon. Hello, Newman.
If it isn't shock jock Hugh Hewitt.
You are
good to hear you, my friend.
You are welcome back. I got to know a few things. First of all, how's everything up at the cave?
Well, my wife has been in Arizona for a month or so I've been devolving into sort of a caveman state, just me here and the dog. She's coming back on Saturday, which means Friday I have got to go out and find replacements for all the plants that she left that I was supposed to water.
Oh, not good. What about your daughter?
My daughter is doing spectacularly well as an advertising. I can't say executive yet. Give her 6 months, but she's working in Boston in an advertising agency and turning out crackerjack work, which you'll probably be seeing nationwide within a year or two or so.
All right. Now, the next question is, Jasper is long gone to dog heaven. Who's the new mutt?
The new mutt is a white lab named Birch, who is the doggiest dog that we've ever had. And we just got back from a walk where it was 18 below when I woke up this morning. It had risen 20 degrees by the time we set out on our journey. And he wanted to explore the entire neighborhood and sniff at things, the nose of which a human being can only guess at. He's fine. He's happy. He's getting fat. He's a dog.
Birch.
Birch.
All right. Now, tell me something. I have two big questions. Do you laugh at those in Washington, D.C. who were turned back by 20-degree weather, you folks up in Minnesota cold?
Yes. Well, I do. But then again, Reagan canceled his inauguration, I believe, and moved it inside because it was 7. So, I mean, I lived in D.C. for 4 years, so I know that when 5 or 6 flakes tend to drift down from the clouds above, everybody runs to the Safeway for toilet paper, bread, and milk. So I'm kind of used to them not being the hardiest souls.
So, Lilacs, what I really want, when I needed you, was after Tim Walz appeared on the national stage, and I was befuddled by Tim Walz. So tell us, have you ever actually sat down with your governor?
No, I never have. One of his former employees is my boss here at the newspaper, closest I'll ever get. But I never did. I never really saw the Waltz that you guys saw until he got a jolt of national fame, and all of a sudden seemed a lot more peculiar, shall we say, than we'd previously come to believe. I mean, before, I just thought that he was sort of a standard issue DFL politician, the likes of which we have many. And I did not think that he acquitted himself with a great deal of gravitas. I thought it was rather bad for the state.
Was he always that animated? He's a very animated person.
Well, I don't remember the jazz hands. That's just it. I don't remember that sort of wild, broad gesticulation that he had before, because it didn't really play that well in the politics of the state up here. But once he got a national shot, I guess it was time to, get the feather boa out of the closet and sashay.
You know, Chris DeGaulle slid into the chair in the morning slot that was previously held by me and then Bill Bennett before me. Chris does a killer impersonation of the governor, and it is the wild hands. It's the jazz hands, and you've never seen that before.
It's also the beseeching expression that we saw in the debates and such. I mean, you want to control your facial animation to the point where they're not going to have a million memes that can be plastered all over the internet, the Twitter. And so, yes, it was, of course, everybody here on the DFL, which is the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, the Liberal Party in Minnesota, was just absolutely delighted because Coach Waltz brought a new form of masculinity to the he was a new kind of patriarch. He was everybody's dad. And those of us who didn't quite get that feeling were a little bit embarrassed with the gushing. Yeah. He plays football on the computer. He's all these things that would knock another guy out of the arena because they would just be symbols of classic toxicness.
You are a student of expressions. J.D. Vance was at the National Cathedral today when he got a lecture, as did the president, by the presiding bishop of the congregants. There are 38,000 Episcopalians inside the district, about transgendered kids and gay and lesbian kids and migrant families. And he did kind of a Jim from The Office. I think J.D. Vance's facial expressions, as Ben Shapiro has pointed out, are going to be invaluable to get through the next 4 years.
They have an understated quality to them. As a matter of fact, after the first debate that he had, the one that got memed incessantly was him looking at the camera, side eyes a little bit. And if this is between you and me, are you seeing this as well? A very knowing expression. I like that. And so, yeah, we can count on him. But the sermon that was given, I mean, I'm surprised that you didn't get to the real contentious issues that are going to shatter the nation, such as the executive orders demanding a return to shower heads that actually have pressure. Now, this is not necessarily something that I want to see the executive branch concern itself with, but here we are.
Well, here we are. We haven't talked in the 8 years since I went to the morning, since 2016.
8 years. It's been 8 years.
8 years. And so I am curious as to your assessment of the country's direction in those 8 years. 4 of Trump, 4 of Biden.
Yeah, well, I haven't liked it much. No, sir, I didn't like it at all. I think I mean, the Trump administration, the Trump years were, as we remember, just an endless series of hammer blows against the president for reasons that you may regard as justified or unjustified. The Watergate, the Russiagate, the impeachment, and the rest of it. It was a long slog. It was a painful, contentious, unhappy period. But I'm not so sure that I enjoyed 4 years of norms. I really didn't, because I had no idea whatsoever whether or not the president that we saw in the basement was the man who was running things, or whether or not some cabal of agents cooking up the new Green Deal and the rest of us were determined to use this opportunity.
Which do you think? I think it was the latter, because Leonard Pelletier is not really on Joe Biden's frontal lobe. Do you think?
I don't think so at all. I don't think so. So yeah, I mean, I did not like the Biden years. I did not like them, no. Put that in whatever Seussian rhyme that you like. What I like now, however, is that we do seem to have some sort of cultural shift. The Overton window has been dragged a bit to the right, and I think there's room.
I think it's sliding downhill the right side. Not just a little bit, but next week we'll talk more. Lilacs is back next week on video. Lilacs.com, and don't forget the Diner, wherever podcasts are available. I don't know how long ago it was. Whenever now Secretary of State Marco Rubio was the Speaker of the Florida House and decided to challenge Charlie Crist for the nomination to the United States Senate. He came out to the studios here in California and sat down across from me. And we spent a couple of hours, and I was blown away. I'm not easily impressed by people at their first meeting, but without a note. He just had put on a master's class in depth of knowledge and dexterity with different facts and answering questions. And flash forward, he had announced his retirement when the Orlando Pulse massacre occurred, and he changed his mind on the air with us. I can't remember again what year that was, but there really are few people as eloquent as him. So he went on CBS Morning today, and he said this, cut number one.
I think the promise the president made, really, if you look at it, is it's going to be the priority. It's going to be the official policy of the United States that the war in Ukraine needs to come to an end. It is a stalemate. It's a war and it's a conflict that was started by Russia. But it is now a stalemate, a protracted and bloody conflict, been incredibly destructive. I would argue for both Russia and Ukraine, but Ukraine is paying the biggest price of all.
And then he went over to the Today Show, and after he got done dressing down Craig Melvin, I played that earlier in the show, he said this, cut number two.
My job is to focus on the president's foreign policy, and it's going to be a foreign policy that's, frankly, as straightforward as any in modern times, and that is that the priority of the Department of State of the United States is going to be the United States, and that's what we're going to focus on.
And then one more cut from his swearing in, cut number three.
If I may take the liberty for just 15 seconds to say something in Spanish, because I know a lot of people back home would be very proud, and I want to make sure I acknowledge that. Quiero darle las gracias a Dios, a mi familia que no está aquí con nosotros hoy, a mis padres que vinieron en este país en el año 1956. Y el propósito de su vida fue que nosotros pudiéramos vivir los sueños que no fueron posibles para ellos. Es un honor increíble ser el secretario de Estado del país más poderoso y más bueno en la historia de toda la humanidad. Y es un gran honor y le doy las gracias al presidente Trump por esta oportunidad. I just said I saved a bunch of money by switching to Geico. That's what I said.
So Rubio's also funny.